My key opened the door not to a home, but to a funeral. The first blow was the smell. It was a physical presence in the air, a cloying, sickly sweet wall of lilies that caught in the back of my throat. It was the scent of hushed chapels and somber goodbyes, and it had no place here, in this house that should have smelled of my mother's old books and the lemon polish she used on the oak floors. I stood motionless in the entryway, the heavy pack, with 6 months of my life still strapped to my shoulders, my mind refusing to process the scene before me. The house was full of strangers, dozens of them, all clad in the somber, light-absorbing fabrics of mourning. They stood in quiet, respectful clusters, their faces composed in masks of polite sorrow, their hushed whispers a funereal hum that filled the unnatural silence. My gaze swept over them, then to the room itself, and a fresh wave of vertigo hit me. This wasn't just a gathering of strangers. This was a strange house. The warm, worn oak floorboards, scarred with the history of my childhood, were gone, replaced by a vast, sterile expanse of white marble that reflected the cold, bluish light of new, unfamiliar fixtures. The floral sofa where I'd curled up during thunderstorms, the grandfather clock that had chimed away the hours of my life, all of it had been erased. My exhausted brain scrambled for a rational explanation. A mistake. I'd walked into the wrong house, but the brass key in my hand was my own, and the shape of the doorway was achingly familiar. Then a voice, clear and trembling with practiced emotion, rose from the center of the room, cutting through the murmurs. Sophia was a force. She was quiet, but her spirit was a fire that could reshape the world around her. She didn't just see the beauty in things that were broken. She saw the promise of what they could become. I knew that voice better than my own. Seraphina. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. My eyes searched the crowd and found her standing beside the fireplace, a vision of tragic elegance in a perfectly tailored black silk dress. She held a single white rose, her knuckles pale, her expression a masterclass in restrained grief. She was playing her part beautifully, and then I saw what she was standing beside. It was a large, ornate easel, and on it, where my grandfather's beloved landscape painting had hung for 50 years, was a photograph of me. The air rushed out of my lungs. The world narrowed to that single, impossible image. It was a photo from 2 years ago, after I'd finished the restoration of the old public library. I was smiling, my face smudged with plaster dust, my hair a mess, but my eyes were bright with a fierce, uncomplicated joy, now framed by an enormous wreath of white lilies and roses. That joy was rendered ghostly, a memory preserved in amber. The guest of honor at this funereal gathering was me. A cold, clammy sweat broke out on my neck. The weight of my pack suddenly felt immense, pinning me to the spot. I watched my sister, my beautiful, captivating sister, lift a tissue to dab at an eye that held no tears. I saw the calculated tremor in her hand, the way her gaze swept across her audience, ensuring they were all bearing witness to her profound sorrow. This was no mistake. This was a performance. A meticulously staged production, and I had just walked onto the set. A sound, small and ragged, escaped my throat. A gasp, a choked breath. It was barely audible, but in the reverent hush of the room, it was like a crack of thunder. A man in a dark suit, standing near the door, turned. His eyes, full of polite sympathy, met mine. They widened, the sympathy vanishing, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. He nudged his wife. She turned, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. A ripple of awareness began to spread through the room. A virus of confusion. Whispers turned to silence. Heads began to turn, one by one, a slow domino effect of shock that washed across the sea of mourners. The sea of black-clad strangers parted as I took a single, deliberate step forward, my heavy hiking boot making a shockingly loud, solid sound on the foreign marble floor. Serafina was faltering, her eulogy stumbling as the room's energy coiled into a tight, tense knot of silence. And in her memory, we must always strive to. Her words died in her throat as she finally followed the collective gaze of her audience. Her eyes landed on me. The mask of the grieving sister didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The practiced sorrow evaporated, leaving behind a raw, primal horror that bleached all the color from her face, leaving her skin as white as the lilies on my memorial. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent, horrified "oh." The single white rose she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers, its petals scattering on the marble floor like fallen tears. This wasn't the shock of a miraculous reunion. This wasn't the joy of a prayer answered. This was the abject, soul-deep terror of a conspirator whose carefully constructed lie had just walked back from the dead and into her living room. She stared at me, her beautiful eyes wide and glassy, not with love, but with a single, damning question that screamed across the silent room. "How are you here?" The silence in the room was a living thing, a brittle, humming entity that threatened to shatter. For a long moment, no one moved. The sea of dark-suited strangers stared, their faces a gallery of confusion and morbid curiosity. Serafina remained frozen by the fireplace, a statue carved from ice, her horrified gaze locked on mine. It was my mother, Eleanor, who finally broke the spell. She materialized at Serafina's side, her face a tight mask of social panic. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Instead, she addressed the room, her voice a strained, overly bright whisper that sliced through the tension. A shock, a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. "Thank you all so much for coming, but as you can see, we need a moment, a private family moment." Her words were a dismissal, a cue for the guests to collect their coats and their bewildered expressions and file out of my home. They moved with a hurried, awkward deference, their eyes darting from my memorial portrait to my living, breathing face, their hushed whispers following them out the door. My stepfather, Arthur, stood by the entrance, nodding stiffly, his face pale and unreadable as he closed the door on the last of them, sealing the three of us inside the mausoleum my home had become. The click of the latch was deafening. The air, now empty of witnesses, grew thick with unspoken things. The cloying scent of the lilies seemed to intensify, a sweet, suffocating perfume of deceit. "Serafina," I said, and my voice was a raw, alien sound, scraped dry by dust and disbelief. "What is this?" That was the permission she needed to move. The ice statue melted back into a performer. A great, shuddering sob escaped her, and she collapsed into our mother's arms, her slender body shaking. "Oh, Sophia, oh my God, Sophia, you're alive!" she cried, her voice muffled against Eleanor's shoulder. "We thought you were gone. We thought we'd lost you." My mother held her, stroking her hair, her own eyes finally daring to flick toward me, filled not with relief, but with a kind of pained accusation, as if my being alive were an inconvenience, a disruption to their well-managed grief. I didn't move. My pack was a lead weight on my shoulders, a reminder of the real world I'd just left, a world of stone and ice and honest, hard work. "Lost me? What are you talking about? There was a memorial, my picture." Serafina pulled away from our mother, her face a carefully constructed masterpiece of anguish. Tears, real or fabricated, now streamed down her cheeks, leaving glistening tracks on her perfect makeup. "There was an accident, Sophie, an avalanche, near your work site in the Alps. We tried to call, we tried everything, but the communication lines were down. Weeks went by, then we received a visual notification." Her voice broke on a sob. They identified. Oh God, it was horrible. We held a funeral. I had to be strong and handle everything for Mom and Arthur. A part of me, a desperate, childish part, wanted to believe her. It wanted to wrap this whole nightmare in the clean, understandable blanket of a bureaucratic error, a tragic mix-up. But my eyes kept straying from her tear-streaked face to the cold marble floors, to the soulless gray couch, to the empty space where the heart of my room, my grandfather's wooden chest, used to be. "My things," I said, my voice flat. "Where are my things? The chest, my tools, my sketches, where are they?" Seraphina's flow of tears faltered. A flicker of something hard, like annoyance, passed through her eyes before being quickly veiled by more sorrow. "Things, Sophia, we thought you were dead. We had to move on. We couldn't live surrounded by painful reminders." "So you erased me," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You threw out my entire life and redecorated?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. The sheer speed of it, the totality of the erasure, it didn't feel like grief, it felt like an opportunity seized. "It was too hard for your mother," Seraphina snapped, her voice losing its sorrowful tremor and gaining a sharp defensive edge. "Do you have any idea what we've been through? The sleepless nights, the arrangements. I had to handle all the finances, the estate, everything." And there it was, the word that changed everything. Estate. "The estate?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. A flush of color rose in Seraphina's pale cheeks. She knew she'd made a mistake. She tried to backtrack, stumbling over her words. "Well, yes, I mean, someone had to take responsibility, and with you gone." She waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a minor detail. But her eyes, her beautiful, duplicitous eyes, met mine, and in them I saw it all. It wasn't just hardness now. It was a flash of cold, clear calculation, a glint of avarice that her performance couldn't hide. She took a deep breath, and the final nail was hammered into the coffin of my naivete. "Well," she said, her voice dropping, laced with a chilling pragmatism that cut through all the feigned emotion. "I was the sole remaining heir, after all." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sole, remaining heir. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a statement of fact, from a reality she had tried to create. The air left my body, and in its place, a block of ice formed in my chest. The lingering, desperate hope that this was all a terrible mistake finally died, and in its place grew a horrifying, crystalline certainty. This wasn't a tragedy she had endured. It was a strategy she had executed. My death hadn't been a source of pain for her. It had been a promotion. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single tear. I simply turned, the word heir echoing in the sterile silence of the room they had built on my grave, and walked out. I left my heavy pack, with its 6 months of grime and honest labor, sitting on their pristine marble floor like an accusation. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, the familiar click of the latch now sounding like the locking of a crypt. The cold night air was a shock, but it was a clean cold, a real cold, and I breathed it in like a drowning woman finding the surface. I walked for an hour, my mind a blizzard of white noise. until the manicured lawns of my old neighborhood gave way to the anonymous glare of a commercial strip. The first motel I saw had a flickering neon sign that promised vacancy and color TV. It was perfect. The room smelled of bleach and desperation. The carpet was a tapestry of old stains, and the lock on the door was flimsy. It was the antithesis of the life Serafina was now living, and for that reason, it felt like the safest place on earth. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the springs groaning in protest, and for the first time, I let myself shake. The tremors started in my hands and spread through my entire body, a violent, silent storm of shock and betrayal. It wasn't just the lie, it was the breathtaking scope of it, the funeral, the redecorated house, the casual, chilling finality in Serafina's voice. They hadn't just wished me gone, they had made it a reality. They had held a party on my ashes. But as the tremors subsided, something else took their place. Not grief. Grief is for loss. And I hadn't lost them. I had simply finally seen them for what they were. What replaced the grief was a cold, quiet rage. It was a craftsman's anger, not explosive or chaotic, but focused and precise. It was the kind of anger that builds, that fortifies. It was the anger of a restorer, looking at a beautiful thing that had been willfully broken and knowing with absolute certainty that it was her job to make it right. I pulled my laptop from my small shoulder bag and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. The question wasn't what they did. I had seen that with my own eyes. The question that burned in my mind was why? Why now? What was the catalyst? My life wasn't one of wealth. We were comfortable, but not rich. My work was my passion, but it paid modestly. There was no insurance policy, no trust fund that I knew of. The answer had to be something new. I started where all modern investigations begin, the internet. I searched Serafina's social media, which had become a sickeningly perfect tribute to her grieving process. Photos of us as children, captioned with saccharine remembrances. A post about the excruciating task of sorting through my belongings. It was all there, a public performance for an audience of sympathizers. But there were no clues, so I broadened my search. I started looking through public records, obituaries, county filings for the last 6 months. I typed in my mother's name, my stepfather's, nothing. Then, on a whim, I typed in a name I hadn't thought of in years. Evelyn Reed, my maternal grandmother. My mother had painted her as a ghost in our lives long before she became one. A difficult, eccentric woman who lived hours away and had disapproved of my mother's marriage to my father and then her remarriage to Arthur. We saw her maybe once every few years, brief, stilted visits, where I remember a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the polite facade of our family. My mother always said she was cold, that she had cut us off. The first result was an obituary. Evelyn Reed passed away 4 months ago. A quiet, private service was held. My breath caught. 4 months ago, right in the middle of my time in the Alps. I stared at the screen, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. Eleanor had never said a word, not a phone call, not an email. She had let her own mother die without telling her eldest granddaughter. That was the first crack in the dam. The water began to pour through. My hands trembled as I opened a new tab, my mind racing. The timing was too perfect, too deliberate. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the motive. I navigated to the county probate court website, my heart pounding a heavy rhythmic beat against my ribs. I typed Evelyn Reed's name into the public records search. A single file appeared. Estate of Evelyn Reed, case number 742, PR 25. I clicked on it. The documents took a moment to load on the slow connection, each second stretching into an eternity. And then it was there, laid out in the cold, black and white finality of legal text. A summary of assets, property holdings, investment portfolios. The numbers swam before my eyes, figures with so many zeros they seemed unreal. My grandmother, the difficult, eccentric woman, hadn't just been comfortable. She had been quietly, immensely wealthy, the result of a lifetime of shrewd work and careful investment in her late husband's engineering firm. A fortune built on the very principles of hard work and substance. My mother and sister openly disdained. I scrolled down, my finger tracing the lines of text on the screen, until I found the section I was looking for. Last Will and Testament. I clicked the link to view the scanned document. It was her signature, shaky but decisive. And then I saw the clause, the single paragraph, that made the entire monstrous conspiracy click into place. And the entirety of the residual of my estate I give, devise, and bequeath to my beloved granddaughter, Sophia, whose hands, like mine, know the value of building and preserving what is good in this world. The words blurred. My beloved granddaughter. A woman I barely knew had seen me more clearly than the family I had spent my life trying to please. She had left me everything, and Serafina had found it. The legal notices, the official letters, they would have been sent to my home address. My sister, the self-appointed manager of my affairs, would have opened my mail. She would have seen the will, seen the fortune that was meant for me, and in the same stack of mail, found a notice about a remote avalanche in the Alps. It wasn't a tragedy for her, it was a business opportunity, a jackpot. The rage was a fire in my veins now, burning away the last vestiges of shock and pain. It left behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. This wasn't just about a house or a stolen inheritance. This was about a life she had tried to erase, a legacy she had tried to desecrate. I scrolled to the final page of the probate filing. There, at the bottom, was the name I needed, the name of the man my grandmother had trusted. Executor, Alistair Blackwood, Blackwood and Finch Associates. I closed the laptop, plunging the dingy motel room back into darkness. But it was no longer a darkness of despair. It was the quiet, patient darkness of the workshop before the work begins. I finally had my blueprint, I had my tools, and I knew with every fiber of my being exactly what I had to build. The address for Blackwood and Finch Associates existed in a different universe from the flickering neon sign of my motel. It was a limestone building in the heart of the financial district, with a name carved in discreet, elegant letters above a set of revolving doors made of burnished brass. Pushing through them, I left the noise and grime of the city behind and entered a lobby of hushed reverence. The air was cool and smelled faintly of old money and floor polish. I felt like an imposter. My clothes, the same ones I'd been wearing for 2 days, were wrinkled and plain. My hair was pulled back in a severe functional knot. I had the distinct feeling that the marble cherub on the fountain was judging me. But the resolve that had solidified in that dingy motel room was a suit of armor. I walked to the security desk, my footsteps echoing softly, and gave my name. Alistair Blackwood's office was on the top floor. The elevator ride was a smooth, silent ascent that felt symbolic. When the doors opened, I was met not by a sterile corporate reception, but a space that felt like a private library. The air here smelled of old leather, paper, and Earl Grey tea. A kind-faced woman with silver hair looked up from her desk and smiled. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you, Miss Reed." He was standing by a vast window that overlooked the city, a silhouette against the pale morning light. He turned as I entered, and my first impression was one of substance. He was a tall man, likely in his late 70s, with a thick head of white hair and a face that was a roadmap of a long and thoughtful life. He wore a tweed jacket that had seen better decades, but it suited him perfectly. His eyes, behind a pair of silver-rimmed glasses, were sharp and kind. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Miss Reed, thank you for coming on such short—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened, and the polite, professional smile vanished from his face. He took another, closer look, his gaze sweeping over my face, my travel-worn clothes, the exhaustion that I knew was etched around my eyes. The color drained from his cheeks. "My dear child," he breathed, his voice a whisper of pure astonishment. "It can't be." He slowly took off his glasses as if they were deceiving him. "Sophia?" "Mr. Blackwood," I said, my own voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "I believe you've been trying to reach me." The file he was holding slipped from his fingers, scattering papers across the deep burgundy of the Persian rug. He didn't seem to notice. "Trying to reach you? My dear girl, we've been searching for you. We sent letters, we hired investigators, but then the official report came from the French authorities." He sank into one of the large leather armchairs that faced his desk, looking at me as if I were an apparition. "We were informed you were deceased, so I gathered," I said dryly. "My sister was kind enough to hold a funeral." The look on his face shifted from shock to a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Ah," he said, the single word heavy with meaning. "Serafina, of course. Please, sit." For the next hour he listened. I told him everything from the moment I opened the door to the lily-scented horror, to Serafina's chilling, pragmatic admission. I spoke with the detached precision of someone describing a flawed restoration project, laying out each piece of deceit, each crack in the facade. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched me, his kind eyes filled with a growing storm of anger on my behalf. When I finished, there was a long silence. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on his great mahogany desk. "Sophia," he began, his voice soft but resonant, "I was your grandmother's friend for over 40 years. She was one of the most astute, no-nonsense women I have ever known, and she was not cold. She was simply allergic to pretense. She saw the glittering, hollow ambition in your mother and Serafina from a mile away." He paused, looking at me with an intensity that felt like a gift. "But she saw you. She saw the grit in you. She used to tell me, 'That girl has good hands, Alistair. Not pretty hands, but good hands. They know how to work. They know how to build things, not just buy them.' That, to her, was the greatest compliment." He told me how she had quietly followed my career, cutting out articles about my restoration projects. He told me she had once driven 3 hours, unannounced, just to walk through a small historical society building I had restored as a student project, leaving a significant anonymous donation on her way out. "She didn't want to interfere," Alistair said. "She wanted to see what you would build on your own. And she was so incredibly proud." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a prickling behind my eyes. This woman I barely knew had been my silent champion, the only one in my family who had seen my value, not in spite of my work, but because of it. "She knew they would try something," Alistair continued, his voice hardening. "Her will is ironclad. She named you and only you, but she also knew that a will is only as strong as the truth. Which brings us to this. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick file bound with a rubber band. He slid it across the polished mahogany surface toward me. This was it, the weapon. When Serafina presented us with the official documentation of your passing, my office began the process of executing the will in her favor as the contingent beneficiary. But something felt wrong. Your grandmother had warned me to be cautious, so we did our own due diligence. I opened the file. My hands were perfectly steady. Inside was a meticulously organized collection of my sister's crimes. There was a copy of the forged death certificate, obtained through a disreputable contact in Europe. There were printouts of intercepted emails between Serafina and this contact, discussing payment and the need for haste. There were bank statements showing large, unauthorized wire transfers from my grandmother's accounts. Funds Serafina had accessed with a fraudulent power of attorney to luxury car dealerships and high-end boutiques. She hadn't even waited for my body to grow cold before she had started spending the money. She was sloppy, Alistair said, a note of contempt in his voice. She was arrogant. She believed everyone was as easily fooled as your mother. He leaned back in his chair. Sophia, this file is your ammunition, but the true weapon is the estate itself. Your grandmother left you with considerable resources. As of this morning, I have frozen every account Serafina has touched. But the primary assets, the controlling shares in the Reed Engineering Trust, they are yours. You are now a very wealthy and powerful young woman. He picked up his phone, dialed a single number, and spoke. Catherine, please initiate the transfer of all liquid assets from the primary trust to the new personal account for Ms. Sophia Reed. Immediately. He hung up and looked at me, a glimmer of a smile finally touching his lips. Welcome back from the dead, Ms. Reed, he said. Now shall we discuss how you'd like to arrange the haunting? I looked down at the evidence in the file, at the proof of my sister's greed and my mother's complicity. The last flicker of pain was gone, burned away by the clean, hot flame of purpose. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine anymore. This was about restoring the truth. The restorer in me was awake, and she had a great deal of work to do. My partnership with Alistair Blackwood was forged in the quiet, leather-scented air of his office. I walked out of that limestone building a different woman than the one who had entered. The grime of the road and the dust of the Alps were still on my clothes, but the core of me had been fired into something new, something hard and bright. The numbers on the bank statement Alistair had handed me didn't feel real, but the file folder full of my sister's treachery felt like the heaviest, most solid thing I had ever held. That evening, I did not return to the motel. Alistair had insisted I use a corporate apartment the firm kept for visiting clients. It was a clean, impersonal space high above the city, a place of polished surfaces and quiet efficiency. It became my war room. For 2 days, I barely slept. Fueled by black coffee and a cold, clarifying anger, I spread the contents of Alistair's file across a large glass dining table. It wasn't a demolition I was planning, it was a deconstruction, a restorer's revenge. I would find the weak points, the load-bearing lies, the structural rot, and I would carefully, meticulously remove them until the entire rotten structure of their lives collapsed under its own weight. Alistair became my strategist, my mentor in this new world of wealth and power. Patience, Sophia, he'd advise over the phone, his voice a calm anchor in my storm of purpose. Patience is a virtue the greedy rarely possess. They will move quickly, they will be arrogant, and they will make mistakes. We will simply be there to document them. Our first target was Serafina's world, the glittering, superficial realm of luxury marketing. She saw herself as a queen in this world, a tastemaker. Alistair's team, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient group of forensic accountants and researchers, dug into the company she worked for. What they found was not surprising. The firm, for all its glossy campaigns and high-profile clients, was built on a foundation of debt. They were over-leveraged, constantly chasing the next big contract to pay for the last one. "They're vulnerable," Alistair explained, pointing to a line on a balance sheet during a meeting in my new command center. "Their primary operating loan is held by a smaller, regional bank that would be more than happy to sell that debt at a slight discount to get it off their books." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Through a series of holding companies, we can purchase that debt. You will, in effect, become their silent, invisible banker, their landlord. Serafina will be working every day to pay back a loan owned by the sister she declared dead." The beautiful, cold irony of it settled over me. It was perfect. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was insidious. It was control. Within a week, the transaction was complete. Serafina went to work every day, swiping her keycard, complaining about deadlines and demanding clients, completely oblivious to the fact that the invisible hand now controlling her professional fate was mine. Our second target was my mother. Eleanor's currency wasn't money itself, but the social status it could buy. For years, her primary ambition had been to ascend the ranks of the city's philanthropic elite, to get her name on the boards of museums and charities. Her ultimate goal was a coveted spot on the organizing committee for the annual museum gala, the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar. "She's been trying for years," I told Alistair, remembering the endless talk of it at family dinners. "She donates just enough to get her name in the program, but never enough to get a real seat at the table." Alistair smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Well," he said, tapping a glossy brochure for the upcoming gala that his team had procured, "I believe the museum is currently seeking a new primary benefactor for the event. The lead sponsor dropped out last month. A sponsorship of that level would not only guarantee a seat on the committee, it would essentially make the benefactor the committee's most important voice. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would not just sponsor the gala, I would become its savior. Through a newly established charitable foundation, named in my grandmother's honor, the Evelyn Reed Foundation for Heritage Arts, we made an offer the museum couldn't refuse. The donation was anonymous to the public, the benefactor's identity known only to the museum's director and a few key board members. 2 weeks later, my mother called Serafina. Alistair had arranged for a discreet trace, and the transcript of the call was a masterpiece of preening self-congratulation. "You won't believe it, darling," Eleanor had gushed. "They called me themselves, the director. Apparently, a new, very private benefactor insisted that I be offered a position on the gala committee. They said this person deeply admired my long-standing commitment to the arts. They finally see my value, Serafina. They finally see it." I read the words on the page, and I felt nothing but a cold, detached satisfaction. I had handed her the prize she coveted most. She was now a puppet in my production, eagerly climbing a ladder I had placed for her, a ladder that led directly to a stage of my own design. While I built my plan, piece by meticulous piece, Serafina was busy spending her newfound fortune. The reports from Alistair's team were a steady stream of excess. A down payment on a sprawling penthouse apartment with a view of the park, a new Maserati, a 5-figure shopping spree at Chanel. She was living a life she hadn't earned, a life built on a lie, and she was doing it loudly for all the world to see. Every purchase, every Instagram post of her lavish new lifestyle was another nail she hammered into her own coffin. I watched it all from my quiet apartment in the sky, not with anger, but with the dispassionate eye of a craftsman. She was building her own stage, and I was now the executive producer, ready to bring the curtain down. The invitation arrived not by mail, but by courier. It was a thick, cream-colored card, heavy with the self-importance of its sender, delivered to Alistair's office and immediately brought to my apartment. I didn't need to see the return address. I could feel the chill of it from across the room. Alistair placed it on the glass table between us. I picked it up. The cardstock was embossed with a swirling, ostentatious S in gold leaf. The lettering inside was an elegant, flowing script, the ink glittering under the lights of my war room. You are cordially invited to celebrate the new home of Serafina Reed. Below the address, a penthouse on Park Avenue that I now knew she had purchased with my grandmother's money, was a small, tasteful line, a toast to new beginnings and cherished memories. Cherished memories, I read aloud, the words tasting like poison. She means the memory of my funeral, I assume. Alistair sighed, a deep, weary sound. She's flaunting it, Sophia. This isn't just a party, it's a coronation. She's presenting herself to the world as the new matriarch of the Reed family, the sole heir to its legacy. My grandmother's legacy, I corrected, my voice quiet but as hard as steel. A legacy of substance, not spectacle. The party was a week later. In that time, Serafina orchestrated a media blitz. Not in the major papers, but in the glossy, superficial society blogs and luxury lifestyle magazines she held in such high regard. Alistair's team compiled a dossier of the coverage. There were photos of her overseeing the final touches on the penthouse, her face a mask of thoughtful concentration. There was an interview where she spoke of the bittersweet nature of her recent inheritance. It was all so sudden, she was quoted as saying, a manufactured tremor in her words. Losing my beloved sister, and then so soon after, my grandmother. It's been an immense burden, but I feel a profound responsibility to honor their memory, to live a life they would have been proud of. Every word was a lie, polished and presented to an audience that craved such melodrama. Every photograph of her, draped in designer clothes against a backdrop of marble and glass, was a desecration of my grandmother's quiet, hard-won success. The night of the party, I did not go near Park Avenue. I remained in my high-rise sanctuary, which now felt less like a war room and more like a sniper's nest. I had a direct view of the city's glittering skyline, a river of light and ambition. Somewhere in that river, my sister was hosting her victory celebration. Alistair had arranged for intelligence. One of the catering staff was a former client of his, a man who owed him a significant favor. He provided a steady stream of text message updates, painting a vivid picture of the scene. Champagne tower in the entryway. Absurd. Guest list is a who's who of the shallowest people in this city. Your mother is holding court by the fireplace like the Queen Mother, telling everyone how proud she is of Serafina's resilience. I read each message and felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I imagined the scene, the air thick with expensive perfume and fake laughter. The conversations revolving around money, status, and the latest gossip. And at the center of it all, my sister, soaking in the admiration, believing she had won. She had built herself a stage, a monument to her own greed and deceit. It was more perfect than anything I could have designed. The final piece of the trap was something Serafina herself provided. Around 10 o'clock, Alistair's contact sent a new message. She's making a speech. Getting up on the grand piano. God help us all. I waited. The minutes stretched out. I pictured her, bathed in the soft glow of the penthouse lights, commanding the attention of the room she had stolen. I could almost hear the practiced tremor in her voice, the false humility she would wrap around her words like a cloak. Then the final text arrived. It was a long one, a near verbatim transcript of the speech's climax. I want to dedicate this evening to 2 women who are no longer with us, the message read, quoting Serafina. My grandmother, Evelyn, a woman of incredible strength, and my sister, Sophia. This home, this life, it's not for me. It's to honor them. I know Sophie would have wanted this. She was always so simple, so unconcerned with worldly things. She would have wanted me to have this, to use this legacy to carry the family name forward, to live the life she never could. So when you look at this beautiful home, don't think of it as mine. Think of it as a testament to her memory, a monument to my sister. I set the phone down on the glass table. The bait had been taken. The trap was set. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She had stolen my life story and twisted it into a self-serving narrative, painting me as a simple-minded martyr to her own glorious destiny. She had built a monument, all right, and I was about to become the wrecking ball. I stood up and walked to the vast window, looking out at the city that held her party. The cold glass was smooth against my fingertips. She felt safe up there in her glass box in the sky, surrounded by sycophants, insulated by a fortune she didn't earn. She believed the ghost was buried, the story was written, the victory was absolute. It's time, Alistair, I said, my voice calm, my reflection in the dark glass showing a woman I barely recognized, her face pale, her eyes burning with a cold, bright light. Let's send out the real invitations. The elevator ascended in a silent gilded cage, carrying me towards the pinnacle of my sister's fabricated world. I was not the same woman who had stumbled into my own funeral weeks ago. The grime of my travels had been washed away, replaced by a cold, hard polish. I wore a suit, tailored from a dark charcoal wool that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't a statement of fashion, it was a statement of intent. It was armor. My hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and the only color on me was the deep red of my lipstick, a slash of defiance in a sea of monochrome. Beside me, Alistair Blackwood stood like a mountain of quiet integrity, his presence a silent testament to the legitimacy of my cause. He held a slim, leather-bound portfolio under his arm. When the elevator doors opened, we were hit by a wall of sound and heat. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 competing perfumes, the taste of expensive champagne, and the loud, brittle laughter of people who had nothing important to say. The penthouse was a galaxy of glittering surfaces, marble floors, mirrored walls, crystal chandeliers, all reflecting a crowd of beautiful, hollow people. They were peacocks, preening in their designer feathers, their conversations a meaningless symphony of brand names and gossip. This was Serafina's kingdom, a monument to the superficial. No one noticed us at first. We were anomalies, too sober, too quiet, too real for this glittering mirage. We stepped out of the elevator and onto the white marble floor, and the spell of the party began to break, slowly at first, a ripple in a perfectly still pool. A woman with a face pulled tight by surgery and ambition stopped mid-laugh, her eyes catching on Alistair's distinguished, out-of-place figure. Her gaze slid to me, and a flicker of confusion crossed her features. She nudged her companion, a man with a florid face and a watch worth more than my first car. He turned, his jaw went slack. The ripple spread, laughter faltered, conversations trailed off into confused murmurs. The sea of peacocks began to part, a silent path of awe and disbelief clearing before us as we walked. I saw them then, at the far end of the room, near the grand piano she had so theatrically used as her stage. My mother, Eleanor, was radiant, accepting the fawning compliments of a small circle of admirers. And Seraphina was a queen holding court. She was luminous in a gown of liquid gold. A champagne flute held delicately in one hand, her face glowing with triumph. She was basking in the final moments of her victory, completely unaware of the ghost walking toward her. My mother saw me first. Her smile froze, then shattered. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the heavy pearls there, as if to ward off an evil spirit. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. She tried to say my name, but only a choked, strangled sound came out. Seraphina, annoyed by her mother's sudden distraction, turned. Her head was tilted in a question, a small, perfect smile still playing on her lips. And then her eyes met mine across the silent, crowded room. The universe seemed to hold its breath. The smile didn't just fade, it was wiped from her face, erased by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock that was so profound it was almost beautiful. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble, the sound echoing the one from weeks ago in another life when she had first seen me. The liquid gold of her dress seemed to turn to lead, her body going rigid. For a long, silent moment, she was no longer a queen, but a terrified child who had just seen the monster under her bed climb out and walk into the light. I didn't slow my pace. I walked with the deliberate, unhurried gait of someone who owned the very ground she was walking on. The silence in the room was now absolute, a thick, humming void, filled only by the soft, steady click of my heels on the marble. I stopped directly in front of her, close enough to see the frantic, terrified pulse beating in her throat. She found her voice, a thin, reedy whisper that was nothing like the confident tone of her speech. "Sophia, what are you doing here? This is a private party." I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "Is it?" I asked, my voice quiet but carrying through the dead air of the room. I glanced around at the sea of gawking faces. It feels rather public to me. My gaze fell upon the microphone, still standing on a small stand by the piano. "I was so moved by your tribute, Seraphina. Truly, a monument to my memory. It was so generous. I felt it only right that I come and thank you in person." I reached out and took the microphone. My fingers brushed hers, and she flinched as if she'd been burned. The microphone felt cool and heavy in my hand, a scepter of power. I turned not to face her, but to face her audience. I looked out at the crowd of stunned, silent faces. "Good evening," I said, my voice amplified now, calm and clear and utterly controlled. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sophia Reed. I apologize for the intrusion. I seem to have arrived a bit late to my own wake." A collective gasp went through the room. "My sister, Seraphina, is right about one thing," I continued, my eyes finding hers again. I saw raw panic there now, a desperate, cornered animal. She spoke of honoring our grandmother's legacy, a legacy of strength, integrity, and hard work. But a legacy is not a prize to be won with a lie. It is a responsibility to be earned with the truth. I gestured to Alistair, who took a small step forward. This is Alistair Blackwood. For 40 years, he was my grandmother's closest friend and legal counsel. He is also the executor of her will, the real will. The word hung in the air, a death knell to my sister's charade. "Thank you, Seraphina," I said, my voice dropping slightly, laced with an irony as sharp as a shard of glass. "Thank you for gathering all of these important people together to witness this. Thank you for building such a beautiful monument. But I think you've made a small mistake in the dedication." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, watching the sweat begin to bead on my sister's forehead. "You see, you aren't the heir to the Reed family legacy. You're just the first exhibit in a museum of fraud I'm about to open." My eyes swept the room one last time, meeting the gaze of every stunned guest. "And thank you all for coming to the party, but I'm afraid it's over now. The real owner of this penthouse would like you to leave." A collective gasp, sharp and unified, sucked the air from the room. My final words, "the real owner of this penthouse would like you to leave," hung in the air, a declaration of war that had already been won. The guests, who moments before had been my sister's fawning courtiers, now looked at her as if she were a venomous creature they had just found curled in their champagne glass. They began to shuffle backward, a slow, instinctual retreat from a contagion of shame, widening the circle around my family and creating an impromptu courtroom in the center of the shimmering penthouse. Seraphina stared at me, her face a grotesque canvas of disbelief and fury. The shock had burned away, leaving behind the raw, ugly snarl of a cornered animal. "You're insane," she hissed, the words slithering from between her perfectly painted lips. She took a staggering step toward me, her golden dress, which had seemed so luminous, now looking like a cheap, gaudy costume. "You're insane, and you have always been pathologically jealous of me." She whirled to face the crowd, her arms spread in a desperate, theatrical appeal, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. "Can't you see what this is? She vanishes for 6 months, abandons her family without a word, and then crawls back, out of whatever hole she was in, to ruin my life. All because she can't stand to see me happy, to see me carrying on with strength and dignity after our family's tragedy." My mother, her face blotchy with a rising tide of social panic, rushed to Seraphina's side, grabbing her arm. "That's enough, Sophia," she pleaded, though her eyes were not on me, but on the horrified faces of the guests. She was calculating the fallout, the irreparable damage to her reputation. "This is a private family matter. You are making a scene. You are embarrassing us." "Embarrassing you?" I repeated, my voice dangerously soft, yet it cut through the room like a razor. "Mother, we are so far beyond embarrassment that it's a distant speck in the rearview mirror." "She's lying," Seraphina shrieked, tearing her arm from our mother's grasp. Her carefully constructed composure had shattered, revealing the hysterical, grasping child beneath. "Someone call security. Get this crazy woman out of my home." "I don't think that will be necessary," a calm, authoritative voice boomed from beside me. Alistair stepped forward, the slim leather portfolio held in his hand like a tablet of law. He was the picture of unimpeachable integrity, his presence silencing Seraphina's frantic outburst. "And for the record, Miss Reed," he said, his gaze level and colder than a banker's heart, "this is not, nor has it ever been, your home." Alistair gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to a man in a black suit standing discreetly by the far wall. One of his associates, I now realized, who had been there the entire time, an invisible sentinel. The man touched a small device in his hand. The penthouse was dominated by 3 enormous wall-mounted television screens that had been displaying a rotating slideshow of Serafina's glamorous stolen life. Now they all flickered simultaneously and went dark. For a heartbeat, the only light was the glittering chandeliers, reflecting in the terrified eyes of the guests. Then the screens came to life again, not with pictures, but with cold, irrefutable documents. The first image that appeared, magnified to a monstrous size on all 3 screens, was a copy of my death certificate. Alistair's calm, resonant voice filled the room, a narrator for this theater of downfall. Exhibit A, a certificat de décès, purportedly issued by the Prefecture of Chamonix, France. A lovely document, very official-looking. The only problems being that the official seal is from a canton that hasn't existed since the Napoleonic era. My client's name is misspelled, and of course, the rather salient fact that my client is standing right here. A wave of shocked, horrified murmurs rippled through the crowd. I watched Serafina's face. Her defiant fury was beginning to crumble, replaced by a dawning, sickening dread as she stared at the proof of her first clumsy crime. The screens flickered again. Now they displayed an email chain, the text stark and black against a white background. Key phrases were highlighted in a damning blood red. Exhibit B, Alistair continued, his voice as methodical as a surgeon's scalpel, dissecting her lies. An email from a ghost account registered to a public library computer to an individual in Marseille known for procuring unofficial documents. Note the phrase, "Payment of €10,000 will be confirmed upon receipt of the scannable document." Speed is of the essence. We have, of course, traced the €10,000 payment from a bank account that Serafina Reed opened the day after her grandmother's will was read. "No," Serafina whispered, shaking her head, her eyes wide and wild. "No, that's fake. It's all fake." But no one was listening to her. All eyes were glued to the screens as they changed one last time. This exhibit was a simple, brutal timeline. On the left, the date of my supposed death. On the right, a cascading list of bank transactions beginning the very next day. The numbers were stark and unforgiving, a digital record of her avarice. "And finally Exhibit C," Alistair said, his voice laced with a cold, righteous contempt that was more chilling than any shout. A summary of withdrawals from the estate of the late Evelyn Reed, made via a fraudulent power of attorney. You can see the first transfer of $500,000, made less than 24 hours after Ms. Serafina Reed received confirmation of her sister's death. And here the subsequent purchases, a veritable shopping list of stolen joy. The down payment for this very penthouse, a new Maserati, a series of transactions at Chanel, Dior, and Cartier, totaling over $80,000 in a single afternoon. He didn't need to finish. The story was there for everyone to see, a cold digital accounting of a sociopath's greed. The guests were no longer just shocked, they were disgusted. They looked from the damning evidence on the screens to my sister, their faces masks of open revulsion. This was more than just a family squabble, it was a crime they had been unwittingly celebrating. The social death was absolute. She had built her entire world on the admiration of these people, and in the space of 5 minutes, I had turned it all to ash. That was when the facade finally shattered completely. A terrible, guttural sound was torn from Serafina's throat, a sound of pure animalistic despair. "You!" she screamed, her manicured finger pointing, trembling, not at me, but at our mother. "This is your fault. You always said it should have been me. You told me it was my birthright. You told me she didn't deserve it, that she was wasting her life on dirt and old rocks." Eleanor recoiled as if struck, her face collapsing into a ruin of terror and denial. I never, she stammered, her social mask crumbling to reveal the weak, envious woman beneath. It was at that precise moment of beautiful, ugly chaos, as sister turned on mother, as the guests scrambled to get away from the toxic implosion of my family, that the elevator doors opened again with a soft final chime. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out. They were calm, professional, their solid, unimpeachable presence, a sudden, shocking intrusion of cold, hard reality into this world of make-believe. They surveyed the scene, the screaming woman in the golden dress, the weeping older woman, the silent, powerful man in the tweed jacket, and the crowd of horrified onlookers pushing to get away. One of the officers stepped forward, his eyes finding Alistair. "Mr. Blackwood?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, carrying an authority that silenced the entire room. "We received your call." Alistair nodded, the grim work now done. "Thank you for coming, officer. I believe you have a warrant for the arrest of Ms. Seraphina Reed on charges of wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny." The officer turned his implacable gaze to my sister, whose screams had died in her throat, replaced by a series of ragged, terrified sobs. Her beautiful, false world had not just collapsed, it had been condemned. And now the executioners had arrived to carry out the sentence. The aftermath of a storm is a peculiar kind of quiet. After the police led a sobbing, incoherent Seraphina away, after the last of the horrified guests had fled into the night, Alistair and I were left standing in the silent ruin of the party. The penthouse, which had been a stage for my sister's triumph, was now just a crime scene. Half-empty glasses of champagne sat on every surface, abandoned like offerings at a fallen temple. A single gold shoe lay on its side in the middle of the vast marble floor. The air, no longer thick with perfume, smelled faintly of fear and expensive cheese. The monument had fallen. I did not stay there. I walked out, leaving the keys with Alistair's associate, and did not look back. That world of marble and mirrors was never mine. The justice I had sought was not about claiming a penthouse, it was about reclaiming the truth. The legal proceedings were, as Alistair had predicted, a formality. The mountain of evidence he had compiled was insurmountable. Seraphina's defense attempted to paint her as a grief-stricken young woman, easily confused and manipulated by complex financial matters. But the email chains, the bank transfers, the testimony from the man in Marseille, who had forged my death certificate, they told a different, much clearer story. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. I attended the sentencing, not out of malice, but out of a need for closure. I watched Seraphina, dressed in a drab, ill-fitting suit, her face pale and stripped of its usual artifice. She never once looked at me. She wept when the verdict was read, not with remorse, but with the raw, self-pitying rage of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. She was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in a state penitentiary for felony fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. She lost her freedom, her money, her future. She lost everything she had killed me for. My mother's punishment was not delivered by a judge, but by the very society she had spent her life trying to impress. Her fall was quieter than Seraphina's, but in many ways more complete. There was no trial, no public condemnation. There was just a slow, creeping social death. It began with the canceled invitations, the charity luncheon she was supposed to co-chair, the tickets to the symphony premiere. Then her name was quietly removed from the letterhead of the museum's benefit committee, the position she had been so proud of, the one I had anonymously gifted her. It was the ultimate humiliation, a public declaration that her presence was no longer welcome. Alistair told me that for a few months she tried to maintain appearances. She would show up to gallery openings or restaurants, where she knew the city's elite would be, but the reception was always the same. A sudden chill in the air, conversations that would halt mid-sentence as she approached, polite but icy smiles that didn't reach the eyes, and backs that would turn the moment she passed. She had become a pariah, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had utterly rejected her. The story of what her daughter had done, and what she had stood by and allowed, was a stain she could never wash away. Her greatest fear had been losing face, and in the end, her face, her name, her very identity was all she had lost. And Arthur, my stepfather, the silent accomplice, he chose peace. About a month after Serafina's sentencing, he quietly filed for divorce. There was no drama, no public battle. He simply packed a few bags, moved into a small rented apartment across town, and cut off all contact. In his own way, it was the bravest thing I had ever seen him do. He had spent 2 decades enabling my mother's narcissism and my sister's cruelty, always choosing the path of least resistance. By leaving, he passed his own silent judgment on them both. He chose a quiet life of solitude over a noisy one built on pretense. His departure was the final stone pulled from the foundation, and with it, the hollow structure of the family I had once known disintegrated into dust. I felt no triumph in their ruin. The fiery rage that had fueled me had cooled, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clean, quiet space. It was the feeling I got after a long, difficult restoration project was complete. When the dust had been cleared, the scaffolding removed, the broken pieces mended, and the object was left to stand on its own, whole and true once more. The family built on lies was gone. Their story was over. And for the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly free to begin my own. 1 year later, I stood not in a penthouse overlooking the park, but on a sawdust-covered floor in a forgotten corner of the city. The air didn't smell of lilies or champagne, but of fresh-cut pine, linseed oil, and the sharp, clean scent of wet plaster. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed through the arched cathedral windows of what was once the Grand Majestic Theater, a beautiful old vaudeville house that had been left to rot for 50 years. Around me was the music I had come to love more than any symphony, the rhythmic rasp of a handsaw, the distant tap-tap-tap of a chisel on stone, the low hum of voices discussing measurements and joinery. I never sold the penthouse. I donated it, fully furnished, to a nonprofit that provides transitional housing for women escaping domestic abuse. I liked the idea of its cold, sterile spaces being filled with the warmth of real survival, of new beginnings forged in the wake of destruction. My grandmother's money, the fortune Serafina had tried to steal, was a tool, not a prize. A vast, powerful tool that I now wielded with the same care and precision I used with my finest chisels. With Alistair's guidance, I had poured it all into the Evelyn Reed Foundation for Heritage Arts. Our mission was simple: to find beautiful, broken things and make them whole again. The Grand Majestic was our first project. I'd found it by accident, a crumbling brick facade covered in ivy. its glorious past hidden behind plywood and neglect. Research revealed it was the first place my grandfather, a young structural engineer, had taken my grandmother on a date. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Now the rot was being carved out, the structural bones reinforced. The faded, water-stained murals on the walls were slowly being brought back to life by a new generation of artisans. This wasn't just a restoration, it was a resurrection, and it was to be the new home of the Sophia Heritage Restoration Training Center. A young woman named Maria, her face smudged with chalk dust and her eyes bright with concentration, approached me, holding up a piece of intricate plaster molding. She was one of our first scholarship students, a brilliant girl from a poor neighborhood with hands that seemed to have been born with a deep, intuitive understanding of form and texture. "Miss Reed," she said, her voice hesitant but proud, "I think I matched the acanthus leaf pattern from that old photograph." I took the piece from her, its weight cool and solid in my palm. The delicate, curving leaves were perfect, a flawless echo of the building's original glory. "It's beautiful, Maria," I said, and the words were completely true. "Your work is exceptional. My grandmother would have called these good hands." She beamed, a smile of pure, unadulterated pride that was worth more than all the diamonds in Cartier. "Thank you," she whispered, and hurried back to her workstation. I watched her go, and in that moment I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was my family now, not one of blood and obligation, but one of shared purpose and mutual respect. It was Alistair who still called me every Wednesday to check in, his voice a warm, steady presence in my life. It was the master carpenter who smelled of sawdust and patience, the stonemason with calloused hands and a deep love for his craft. It was Maria and the dozens of other students like her who would soon fill these halls with the sounds of creation. I sometimes thought of Serafina in her world of gray concrete and numbered days. I didn't feel anger anymore, or even pity. I just felt a deep, quiet sorrow for the poverty of her ambition. She had seen a pile of money and thought it was the destination. She never understood that it was just the raw material. And my mother, I heard she had moved to Florida, to a small condo in a community of other lonely, transplanted people. She sent a single, rambling letter full of justifications and veiled accusations that I read once and then burned. Her punishment was to live the rest of her life in the hollow, superficial world she had always craved, only now without the money or status to insulate her from its emptiness. I walked to the center of the vast room, to the spot where the stage had once been. I looked up at the skeletal framework of the new mezzanine, at the intricate scaffolding that hugged the walls like a promise of what was to come. My old life had been a bit like this theater, a beautiful facade hiding a slow, creeping decay. My family's betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had gutted the building, torn out the rot, and forced me to rebuild from the bones up. They thought they could bury the truth, that they could write me out of the story and erect a monument on my grave. But they never understood the nature of things that grow. They didn't know that some seeds are meant to lie dormant, waiting for the fire that will crack them open, that it is only from the richness of the ashes that they can finally, truly begin to sprout. My grandmother had left me her fortune, but my family had given me my purpose. They had shown me the stark difference between a price tag and true value. A true legacy isn't the inheritance you are given. It is what you choose to build with it. And as I stood there, amidst the dust and the noise and the glorious, beautiful work of bringing something back to life, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that I was finally building mine.